What is poppin', people? You got Jay Bear here, bringing you all Shuckle Premier League Week 3 slash, I guess, 2 results, Season 3 draft notes. And yeah, before we get into this one, I just wanted to say, please stay towards the second half slash end of the video. And that is because we are doing an interview with CloverBells. CloverBells is a first-time draft league coach taking on the SPL with more of a VGC, especially VGC content background. And yeah, I just wanted to get a chance to hop on the mic with him and ask, a couple of questions about his first VGC draft league experience. And he's a super smart guy, so I encourage you all to stay after and check that out. And then, yeah, I encourage you all to like and subscribe, especially if you're new or if you've been enjoying these draft league watch throughs, or I guess results for draft notes and my predictions, and just waffling about Pokemon in general. So yeah, I guess with all of that being said, I'm just going to give a quick spoiler warning. In about 5 seconds, I will show the results for week 2 and my pick'em score. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to unveil it. You've had all the time in the world to click off, so here are our results. First up, we saw Viz versus Seabad. Game 1, Viz, tried to sauce a little bit too hard with coughing plus Regigigas, but game 2, he ended up, settling down with a Meowstic plus Regigigas with some skill swap shenanigans. And let me tell you, that worked really, really well for Viz. Skill swapping around a bunch of things. Notably, he gave the Credent slow start on Seabad's side, which otherwise could have, done a potential setup threat. He also gave Gothitelle a different ability so that he was able to switch out of Shadow Tag. Truly some incredible use of the utility on Viz's side, and enabling the Regigigas and then later his other teammates like a Sash Dragapult for an incredible endgame. So yeah, I think Viz prepped that one well. I think Seabad also played well when he was able to pick up that first game from Viz, which I think he was able to do well, but I think Viz was just able to adapt a little bit better. Up next, we saw Amel versus Moxie, and Amel kind of cooked with this one. He had a Terra Electric Nasty Plot, very, very defensive Hoopa, which looked really, really good in the set versus Moxie. And Moxie brought a lot of speed on his Pokemon, which looked like it could have put Amel in a bit of a pickle, especially when King Gambit was outspeeding the Hoopa. But with just enough support and the Hoopa being super bulky, it ultimately led to a game where Amel won. I'm curious because I know Moxie missed a Snarl early on, if that mattered, but I don't think it would have ended up mattering. And that was in the second game. Terra Electric Hoopa was just able to do a ton of damage, and Palafin was kind of, relegated to a late game threat, but the game it could come out until too late in that game too. Even though Moxie got a nice timely freeze for the second week in a row with the Obama Snow, it ultimately was unable to put him into the win column for this one. Up next, we saw Nexus versus Keely. A little bit of a weather war, but not really. Keely was, pretty looking to use Nexus's Sun to her advantage, but ultimately it was the rain plus substitute on Tornadus and even the taunt, which made it a little bit too scary for Nexus to, execute his full Sunroom strategy. He was able to shut that down super well and substitute to stall out the Trick Room turns the first time it went up, which was just great prep from Keely. On Nexus's side, he had an Iron Hands that was super well positioned and so bulky. I thought it would be able to pick up an end game, but it was just a little bit too slow in terms of taking KOs for it to ultimately seal up the game. Life Orb Lander is still super duper strong, even though it was Terra Fairy. The Sludge Bomb was able to do a ton of damage to it, and ultimately Keely was able to win, I think quite poetically, with a Typhlosion in the rain, which was pretty funny. So yeah, Keely able to get into the win column. Nexus moves to 1-1. Up next, we saw a great set between Joey and Liv, and I think Liv was able to really highlight her prep game 1 with the Terra Water Volcanion, which I thought could come in my preview of it last week of the matchup. But then game 2 and game 3, Joey went full Deoxys speed demon mode, and that thing was doing numbers with helping hand boosts. It was just able to click like a super effective option on most of Liv's team, and the one thing he didn't have a super effective move for, the Trevenant, got Psycho boosted, and it could have been a potential Trevenant endgame if that didn't happen. So ultimately Joey able to set up a couple of endgames where the Raging Bolt just couldn't quite get through the Mudstale, and Liv potentially giving Joey a couple too many Defiance on the Annihilate, ultimately won this one for Joey in a 3-game comeback set. Up next, we saw Shuckle versus Necra in another 3-game comeback set. In the first game of it, Necra was able to do numbers with the Volcarona Terra Dragon and just able to really set it up with the Key Berry. But then game 2, Shuckle adapted. He actually had a Terra Stellar Urshifu, and that was able to immediately click a Terra Stellar Terra Blast to punish the Terra Dragon Volcarona. And game 3 was super back and forth, and ultimately Necra did have a line that she just didn't see, and that's because Perish is just so difficult. But had she been able to click a Perish late in the game 3, she had the slowest mon remaining. It was a 2v2. She could have ultimately came out on top. And but yeah, we ultimately saw Shuckle persevere in this one on the back of his super scary offensive threats. Up next, we saw Kyle versus Aaron, and Aaron was just able to execute a couple of his strategies. Game 1, he was able to execute with his Spectrier, and game 2, execute with the Ursaluna. Kyle's team, it's like a pretty balanced approach, and Aaron was just able to gun it for 2 separate modes and ultimately take both of the games in pretty different fashions. Up next, we saw Mountay versus Sierra, and oh boy, Mountay, this is just going to be our Chaladon season, isn't it? That mon put in absolute numbers. Game 1, I thought it was a little bit dicey potentially in the end, with Corviknight being able to pick things up, but then Mountay was able to come back in the next 2 games, able to take control of the weather once he was able to actually assess the matchup a little bit better, realized that turn 1 going after the Chi-Yu was a bit more productive than going after the Roaring Moon. But the Terra Ice Overquill looked pretty cool in that game 1, even though it ultimately didn't persevere. And in the end, our Chaladon was able to finish things out for Mountay. In the rain, the Corviknight couldn't quite stop the electro shots like it could have in the sun. Up next, we saw Tone versus That's a +1, and Tone was able to really outplay, I think, this one. I got to, he uploaded his team building process, and in that one, he highlighted a couple of modes that Tone could really scare him with, and Tone was able to just execute super well by delaying the Trick Room. I think was super duper smart on his end with the Ogerpon plus Gardevoir strategy, and in the end, that was able to do numbers. Game 2, Datsa had a little bit more of a line into Tone, but still Tone was just able to hold off that room service Jirachi and ultimately persevere, slow down the threat of Life Orb Terrakion, and really take that game. Up next, we saw OG Albina versus CloverBells, and this was a 3-game set. Owen won game 1. He played quite well, got a little bit lucky early on, and Brute Bonnet, man, that mon lived, I think, 2 or 3 hits that Owen in games was like, that'll OHKO the Brute Bonnet, and it just didn't, which was super impressive. Game 2, Owen got super out of position, and a Choice Scarf Great Tusk was able to just pack things up almost effortlessly, but then Skarmory brought it back in game 3, really a great adaptation for Owen to, recognize that Skarmory was a needed piece here, and he was able to get back into that win column because of the Skarmory. And then in our last game, which I think was our set of the week, we saw Joe versus James, and I predicted, James would go solo fish. I predicted the wrong solo fish, though. Let me tell you, that Terra Fire Tatsugiri with the choice specs was actually super threatening. Game 1, Joe executed super well, and then game 2, he just it got a little bit away from him with that Tatsugiri prep showing itself as the Milotic revealed to be walled, but even then, he had a 50% chance to win, right? If you hit one more scale shot, that was a 1 game and a 1 set for Joe, but instead, we got to see a game 3, and there was one of the funniest moments, I think, of the season, James wave crashing as he sent out his own Tatsugiri and storm drained it away, which was super funny. But other than that, Tatsugiri was able to pick up a bunch of kills and show itself to be a big threat in this format. So yeah, that was our 10 matchups of the week. And now we can move into our pick'ems phase. All right, and for pick'ems, our first matchup is going to be Seabad versus Liv. And Seabad made a few transactions, being able to grab Blaziken, Electabuzz, Torterra, and Gyarados. I think are all new additions for him, taking effect this week. And yeah, I think Electabuzz is going to actually be right away one of those most important Pokemon. I think setting up Electabuzz plus Gyarados, I think, is a great path for Seabad here. Being able to, you know, follow me away any like Thunderclap shenanigans or any potential burns from Volcanion, while Gyarados can really threaten something like Garchomp, which is a bit of a challenge for this Electabuzz. But other than that, the follow me support looks to be super nice. It has to watch out for a potential like knockoff Tinkaton, but other than that, the item looks pretty safe with the Eviolite, and it can output some important damage into things like Volcanion and Tornadus. Can also get some crucial Electro Webs laid down for Seabad, and then I think something like Fluttermane clicking Moonblast and Power Gem for the Volcanion, and like Mystical Fire for the Tinkaton, or Shadow Ball. Just Moonblast Shadow Ball looks pretty good as well. And Goth, I think, could potentially catch Liv here, but I don't think this is the best Goth matchup in the world. I think something like Hariyama's Fake Out could be pretty important here. And I actually think the tech piece of Illumise, I think you might want to go for something like a Sunny Day Illumise, because that means that the Alolan Ninetales can't veil up on you, which I think is something important to note. So I think Seabad has a lot of different avenues, but just in my mind, I'm too afraid of what's happening on Liv's side with that Raging Bolt. Once that Electabuzz goes down, electric type damage is super free into this team. And then with this offensive synergies that Liv has, potentially to punish Fluttermane early on with like Tinkaton, or to just tear the Raging Bolt away into something like just pure electric looks super good here. And I think ultimately Liv has just a lot of options setting up for a Raging Bolt, Thunderbolt end game with the help of those bulky pieces like Volcanion and Garchomp, and then having some, you know, nice pieces like Tinkaton for the Fluttermane. I do think that this is possibly a very good Fluttermane matchup, which could be a bit concerning for Liv, but I think she has enough tools to properly slow it down. So I do think that Liv will win this one. That is my pick'em for the week. Up next, we will see Keely versus Necra. Both of these coaches, you know, they've demonstrated a lot of battling prowess so far, and could have been the shout out last week with, you know, how well it did. But this week, I'm going to shout out Keely's Baxcalibur here. Klefki, you know, looks to be a potential way to wall the Baxcalibur out, but something like Terra Ground looks pretty nice. You obviously don't have to worry about Volcarona burning you due to your thermal exchange ability, which also very much dissuades it from clicking Heat Wave. This is probably a harder Volcarona matchup, if I am being honest. And tearing into ground also, you know, helps you with your Ogerpon matchup, or even something like Terra Steel could be nice. But yeah, you can just fire off Earthquakes. You know, you have a bunch of flying partners that really can help you punish the Klefki, and even just like the combination of Baxcalibur and Landorus offense in conjunction with the Tornadus should be pretty solid on Keely's side. And you know, there's some other nice offensive pieces here as well. I think Typhlosion could come again potentially. I think that Sylveon could do numbers. There's not a really good Fairy Resist here outside of the Volcarona, which is threatened by a couple of different things. You know, the Landorus could be packing Rock Slide this game. The Arcanine is also super threatening here, but ultimately I just keep coming back to this Baxcalibur, trying to set it up in a way where it can click like Loaded Dice Scale Shot or something like that. Could be super threatening for this team. And on Necra's side, I think the Suicune is super key. It has enough natural bulk to be able to slow things down. And outside of Baxcalibur, just throwing off Scald looks pretty nice. And also being a bulky Tailwind, I think, for this team to, you know, match Tailwind, stagger Tailwind, is a super good option for Necra. I also think that the Fake Out support from Palmot could be nice, and it does some pretty solid damage as well if it's going first with the Double Shock or Wild Charge or Thunder Punch, and then like a close combat for the Bax and the Arcanine, and then Ice Punch to drop the Landorus. I think that mon could be super sweet here too. I think this is a bit challenging for Volcarona, but I do think that Ivy Cudgel is another super free button, so the Cornerstone Ogerpon could potentially be unleashed this week. But still, I just think that Keely's offense is going to be a tad bit too overwhelming for Necra here, so I do favor Keely in this one. Up next, we see Moxie Boosted versus Aaron Cybertron Zhang, two incredible VGC content creators. And I've got to shout out the Bingler this week. Being faster than Spectrier is huge. And then that Freeze Dry / Blizzard looks super free in conjunction with a Hydro Pump button. The Wochen potentially can take hits. The Tauros maybe can take a hit. But, you know, if you're like just never melt ice or something like that, and you can dissuade screens, whether that be breaking them with some Brick Break shenanigans, or Psychic Fangs potentially on the Arcanine, or just, you know, getting through, stalling them out, could be an avenue. And I also think the King Gambit looks super solid here. Can force Spectre to Terra or otherwise jail it with Sucker Punch. Kowtow, Cleave, and Iron Head look great as well. And you can afford to slot Protect. Really makes the Tauros and Torracat think twice about coming. So I think that synergy here will be super nice. And then I think something like an Air Balloon or Shuckleberry Pecharunt looks super nice to spread status on this team, slow things down in the Trick Room, and stall things out. Or even something like a Terra Fighting Terra Blast could be cool. You just have to, you know, keep in mind when exactly you're terraing, but otherwise, you know, you potentially might lose out on some damage into the Ursaluna if you can't poison it before it gets its Flame Orb active. I think Palafin here will be too slow. I think if Moxie does try to lean on that Palafin, it's super exploitable here because it kind of can give Aaron some turns to set the Trick Room potentially. And on Aaron's side, I think the Cresselia is super important here. It has so much natural bulk. Something like Colbert Cresselia can help wall out the King Gambit, or even like a Terra Fairy if it's not Iron Head. I think it will be Iron Head for the Enam. And then just clicking Lunar Blessings to heal the team, especially if like Pecharunt's spreading status, could be super clutch here. I think overall the Cresselia support here will be super key for Cybertron to win this game. But I do think that Moxie has just so much raw offense and the anti-Trick Room pieces with the King Gambit and such. Maybe even like you get like a Room Service Abomasnow here, could be super shiced. So I think ultimately Moxie has enough pieces, but I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron won this one. I think his Trick Room pieces are super strong. I just think Moxie can do it, and Moxie finally has his center now, if I can shout that one out real quick. Up next, we see Viz versus Sierra, and in this one, I am super scared of what Viz's Urshifu can do. Sierra's Fairy type is Dash Bun, which, you know, can jail Urshifu, but loses to Iron Crown. Could actually be pretty good here. Can do numbers versus Dragapult and Entei too. I wouldn't be surprised if Dash Bun comes as a low tier pick to slow down a lot of Viz's pieces. But other than the Dash Bun, the Urshifu goes super ham. You have to be wary of something like Roaring Moon going Terra Flying or Fairy, and the Chi-Yu, of course, being able to just rip you. But I think like a Focus Sash or something like that, or even trying to set up your own Trick Room and having Urshifu being able to be your button clicker in Trick Room, I think is a super valid strategy here. And then I think, you know, Viz has been able to do well with Psychic Terrain, but now he doesn't even need to click it himself if Sierra wants to go for it. I think Sierra is kind of pressured to leave that Psychic Terrain at home just because of Iron Crown here. But ultimately, I think that, you know, Viz has a couple of offensive pieces, but I do like Sierra's offense more, especially on the back of this Chi-Yu. Just stabs look super good here, right? You get your fire and you get your dark. Something like a Fairy Araquanid could potentially wall that out, right? Or even just like the natural bulk of Florges. But I think that, you know, outside of that, Chi-Yu just being able to click its buttons looks super prevalent here. If it can hit its Heat Waves, obviously, if it's going for Snarl, hit its Snarls, but just like other than that, I think just Fire Move is super free and then accented with the Dark button as well. And I think that's not where the offensive benefits end. I think that the Ogerpon could be super good. Sorry, I was just thinking about my BBR matchup for a second. It was just in the back of my mind. But the Ogerpon being able to click Ivy Cudgels and Horn Leeches here look pretty good. You have to obviously be wary of like a Terra Fire Araquanid with Water Absorb in that case. But I think Araquanid, it can't check both of these threats. And then the threat of Roaring Moon with booster speed, Terra Flying looks super good as well. And Regieleki as another option. I'm just like, I'm very impressed with a lot of Sierra's offense here. And then I think Daxbun can fit itself on the build. And I think Corviknight's good enough at taking these hits with like an Akaberry or something for the Entei to potentially slow that thing down. So ultimately, I am leaning Sierra in this one. I really do like a lot of her pieces here. And I think that she, has strong offense that can't all be guarded at the same time. Up next, we see Amel versus That's a +1. And I think Amel's Psychic Terrain will be super useful here because the best Psychic resists / immunities are Weavile and Jirachi, right? And so that screams Hoopa Unbound time. And I think without the support of Indeedee, however, that Hoopa Unbound could be slowed down. You obviously have to contend in the Psychic Terrain. Whimsicott could potentially, get like a Prankster, Misty, or Grassy Terrain off, which is something that I do think that's a could bring. But I just think the Follow Me support will also be super handy, especially if the Regidrago wants to go, for a physical move or something like that, or the Jirachi wants to go for like an Iron Head strategy or a U-turn to potentially beat down Hoopa. I think that Indeedee is a key in that. I think Terra Fairy is super clickable here and worthwhile to click on the Indeedee. So I think that that'll be important. And on Amel's side, I also think, the Hoopa Okidogi are super important. And then Blastoise, I think, could potentially be useful here. If Amel doesn't want to lead with it, the Indeedee, it could be like, fake out Blastoise. But other than that, water damage looks pretty good into That's His team. I think we've looked at that in past weeks and noticed it. So I think Amel has a couple of solid options here. And then on that side, I think the Jirachi is super important. I think, it being able to click Iron Head and slow and just like potentially flinch lock things out of the game is super nice. I think it clicking Icy Wind and slowing things down potentially. I think offensively, though, is where I really foresee this Jirachi being useful, especially if something like Skeledirge doesn't show up, or force it to like Terra Fairy to slow down the Terrakion. Something like that, I think, could be super important. The Skeledirge is probably why I'm a little bit hesitant for, like a beat up shenanigans on this team, alongside, of course, the threat of Follow Me Indeedee for the beat up shenanigans. But I still think that there's some paths that can take. I just like Amel's offensive matchup a little bit more, it seems, this week, which is why I am actually, no, I did not record that properly. I am leaning towards That's His offense just because of the Hoopa Unbound, being able to get slowed down a lot with That's His, Tailwind mode. And I think Amel might struggle to set the Trick Room here with something like the Jirachi in the way of Trick Rooming. And I think that has a lot of really, really solid pieces here in order to pick this one up. Up next, we see Nexus versus CloverBells, and these are two teams doing like the pretty similar things. It's Sunroom versus Sunroom, but I think that Nexus has a super important piece that Clover doesn't, being the Iron Hands. I think, it can't really fake out super easily this matchup, but I think the offensive damage of Electric and Fighting, while also forcing That's into uncomfortable turns with, potentially forcing the Farigiraf onto the field, could be super nice here for him. And then just getting this thing in Trick Room and letting it click buttons. I think we could potentially foresee like a Terra Fairy or something, Swords Dance set, be super useful here. You have to, obviously contend in that case with Blood Moon being able to Oko you potentially, but I also think that Torkoal has a very solid matchup here if it can get going offensively. Being the slowest thing is great because it means you're the fastest thing in Trick Room. And the fire resists aren't too plentiful here, so an Eruption could get going. And same with like an After You Eruption potentially mode that Clover also has to contend with. So I think that it'll be a bit of a struggle to shut down that Sunroom mode. And then on Clover's side, I think the Great Tusk is super important. Something like a Terra to get out of, dying in one to Lilligant, like a Terra Fire could be nice. And you also threaten Iron Hands with your stabs, and you threaten Porygon a lot. I think like 4 attacks could be super solid here. And I just really struggle to see, what exactly Nexus's defensive responses are to the Great Tusk. I think it probably can't, it'll be probably tough for it to last longer than a turn. I think, something like a Focus Sash here might actually be super useful, so it can last longer than one turn as it wants to dish out damage. But I do think that Nexus has a bit of an advantage here just because a lot of his offense looks super good. Like, I didn't really even touch that much on Walking Wake and Charizard, which I think both have their places in the sun here. And obviously Lilligant, I think as an enabler, goes super hard too. Up next, we see Joey versus James. And I think this one's going to be a battle of ghost types. I think, into James's more passive, potentially, side of the team. Not necessarily passive, but just slower playing. I think the Annihilate could be super awesome. Getting a chance to, potentially beat it up with the Sneasel could go super hard, because while Dondozo's Unaware is potentially very useful, one thing that it's not unaware of is Rage Fist boosts. So I think that, getting a chance to click the Rage Fist button is super nice. And then I also think that Joey has a couple of different options to potentially slow down solo or the duo of Dozogiri. Like, for instance, I'm sure Deoxys speed is, faster and can start lowering stats potentially for the rest of the team to take advantage. And outside of that, potentially in Trick Room, things could get scary. Something like Terra, Grass, or Dragon, although I think Order Up's coming. So probably like a Terra, Grass, Deancey can help slow things down. I think Manaphy can do a little bit of work as well with like Heart Swap to get rid of the boosts. So I think it's a bit difficult for James to want to, go combine Dozo here. And I think Ape also helps out with that mode, just being able to, actually have the raw damage for it. On James's side, I think the Golden Go is super good. Joey's Shadow Ball responses are quite slim. We saw week 1 versus Cybertron with the Spectrier and how well that did. And Golden Go has a secondary stab. I guess really it's his primary stab in this matchup, potentially secondary, with the Make It Rain that, can't be follow me'd away. And so I think that's super useful here too. Really put something like a Deancey in a bit of a struggling scenario, where it can't exactly come in super freely. If the Golden goes out, there's really no way to protect it without it tearing. Something like Water actually could be pretty good for it though. And then on James's side, I think Solo Dozo looks nice with Glamora, helping out. And we just saw James use Solo Tatsugiri. We saw last week Aim's team being a little bit weak to water moves. So potentially Solo Tatsu could come again. I don't foresee that, though. I think that might have been, a one-off thing. So I still think that I like James's matchup, though. I think he has a lot of good pieces here. I think the Ting Lu can really do its thing against something like Deoxys. And, while Annihilate is there, something like Terra Poison looks nice after the Deoxys goes down, or something else could be pretty solid here. And then I think Meowscarada also has a fantastic matchup. Knockoff, Triple Axle, Flower Trick, all look pretty good into Joey's team. So being able to potentially enable that could be super cool as well. But yeah, I do pick James to win this one. I think he has too many options for Joey to, really confidently contend with every single one of them. I think Joey probably can put eggs into the Annihilate basket, put a couple of eggs into preventing the Dondozo plus Tatsugiri combination from sweeping him, but I think ultimately James has a lot of pieces, which is why I favor him here. Up next, we see Shuckle King versus Mr. Joe UX9. And on Shuckle's side, I really do value the Landorus here. While the Rillaboom can potentially set up, grassy terrain, something like a Stomping Tantrum from the Landorus is super nice here. And being able to, click your Stomping Tantrums, the ground type damage here is pretty strong. Could potentially see Terra flying for a later game damage button into the Rillaboom, or just U-turn. Ground plus U-turn plus like Rock Slide, something like a Terra or like a Scarf Landorus could be pretty threatening, or just, being able to click like a Banded Landorus under Tailwind. I think your Tailwind mode is super strong here with something like a potential, Covert Cloak Talonflame, or, Click and Protect. Something like Dual Wing Beat Talonflame is also super nice here to get around like a Sash Sneasler option. And then I think something along the lines of Zapdos and Urshifu in the later game to potentially clean up looks pretty solid for Shuckle's team. I feel like I predict a very similar game plan a lot of the time. This one, I do think that Riolu has a pretty good possibility of coming, and clicking some coaching support, I think here is actually an application for the Riolu in this one, just because Joe's team does skew quite physically, so coaching has a bit more of a purpose here, and being able to, boost up the Landorus, I think, has a very solid niche here. So I do really like that option on Shuckle King's side. And on Joe's side, I think the Mimikyu is super important. In a way, it's kind of a mix-up for Shuckle's team. I think Trick Room on the Mimikyu could potentially be cool, and we go for like a Trick Room Gouging Fire mode, or like Trick Room and Galarian Moltres, going just like Dark plus Flying looks pretty good into Shuckle's team, or even just doing something like a Curse strategy like he did week 1 against Owen, or even just throwing off a couple of Will-O-Wisps could be super duper strong on Joe's side. I think that's super important. I think something like Milotic is also super important if Zapdos isn't on the field, because Sinistcha does some damage to Milo, but it's not, the strongest in the world, especially clicking a spread move. So I think that, being able to spread burns on this team is something that Joe could be looking to do. And something like Raikou, as much as I hate it, Shadow Ball, Scald, and Thunderbolt looks like a pretty solid offensive combination this week. So ultimately, I do lean towards Mr. Joe UX9 in this one. Got 2 more matchups here for you folks. First up, we've got Kyle A versus OG Albina. In this one, Kyle made a few transactions, that being the Caparaja, Munchlax, and Oranguru are on this one, and I actually think that Oranguru could be super cool here as a Trick Room setter, but I actually really like Kyle's Iron Valiant here. Fairy plus, Fairy looks pretty good into Owen's team, and having a strong like close combat option, but also just like the utility of Iron Valiant, or even something like Vacuum Wave to kind of jail Chien-Pao a little bit could be super solid here. And it has super good offensive synergy next to Hydreigon, which is something I think Kyle could look to use, and potentially, back that strong duo up with something like Incineroar and Amoonguss, and even Primarina I think has a pretty solid use here. And if Kyle wants to, I think like Trick Room from Oranguru, Caparaja, Amoonguss, and Incineroar could be a solid mode here. And like we see Primarina on the bench and then bring like a fast mode here. We could see the Swamp here, but I don't think that the Swamp is actually the best here relative to a couple of Owen's other modes that he could potentially bring. And on Owen's side, I think the Magmar is super important, right? You got the Amoonguss, and this guy is actually super good at shutting down anything Amoonguss may want to do. So I think the Magmar supporting something like Dragonite that can set up, or an Azumarill that can set up, could be a super good combo. Sorry, if you have Magmar on the field, your Azumarill can just kind of go to town, right? Being next to it with like a Goggles Azu, so that you don't get Rage Powdered away. Magmar just continually meing away any other strong attacks, and just clicking Play Rough that's largely unresisted outside of the Azu and Caparaja, but I think ultimately Azu has, a solid place next to the Magmar. I really do like Owen's other offense here. Pow Knight looks pretty solid. Extreme Speed looks really good. And something like next to the Chien-Pao, I think Ruination Chien-Pao could be super nice. You got 2 mons that fully wall the stabs, and no common type to hit them between with Terra. So I think Ruination, putting things at 50% in range of like an E-Speed from D-Knight follow-up or some other follow-up, could be super solid here as well. So ultimately, I think Owen has a lot of tools here, which is why I lean towards picking him in this one. In our final matchup of the week, we see Mountay going up against Tone, and I think the rain is going to keep coming down. On Mountay's side, I think Thundurus is super important because Tone's going to have a weather setting ability. He's also going to presumably have Manual Sun on the Volbeat. So having something like Thunderous to potentially take advantage and set the weather back up for yourself, so you don't have to worry about like always perfectly positioning your Pelipper, is going to be a bit of help here. And also just being able to raw function outside of rain with like either Focus Blast or Superpower if you don't want to miss Thunderous, I think looks super good. And then Thunderbolt as well looks pretty solid next to that combination. And then something for hitting Ogerpon Hearthflame for a lot of damage here looks pretty good. And then something like Scarf Basket Legion, I think, also is another solid pairing on Mountai's side. And I think supporting that with something like a Mousehold and Archaludon, could be super solid. We might not even see Mountay going super hard on the rain this week, which I think is a very real possibility. On Tone's side, the final shout-out mon of the week is going to be Keldeo. Looking at Keldio's stabs into Mountay's team, outside of Basket Legion, there's really not a lot for this little horse right here. So I think Tone has a lot of resources that can be dedicated to Basket Legion and slowing that mon down, or even a Terra on this Keldeo. So ultimately, I think if Tone is going to win this one, Keldeo is the key. But I still really do like Mountay's matchup. I think it just functions so well outside of rain. That's hard for me to stray away from that team. And ultimately, I do pick Mountay to win this one and move to 3-0. So yeah, be sure to stay tuned. We've got the CloverBells interview up next. See you then. Alrighty, folks, and we are here with the interview portion of this episode of Draft Notes. And joining me on the mic, like I mentioned, is CloverBells. If you want to give a quick introduction.
Yo, what's going on, guys? This is CloverBells, also known as Joe. How are you guys doing here? Thanks again, Jesse, for inviting me to one of these.
No, I'm so happy to get on the mic with you today. And yeah, if you just want to give everyone a quick little background on, who you are in the Pokemon sphere, more known for your VGC stuff, obviously, but if you want to give a quick intro to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started playing VGC during the Sword and Shield era, right when peak COVID happened, more or less. So during that time, a lot of us were stuck at home, and basically, was just looking for something to do, right? And I remembered, I had a Nintendo Switch. I remembered I had Pokemon Shield, and I figured, you know what? I didn't actually beat this game, so let me actually, play it and beat it. But then after that, I was trying to do a little bit of breeding and get some mons to fill out the decks. And when I was doing that, I was looking up guides on YouTube, and then I came across like these eventually it would be the VGC side of things, doubles battles. I was like, oh, this is actually a competitive thing. I didn't realize that. And then before you know it, I started down the tumbleweed of the YouTube algorithm and kept finding VGC content. And from there, I realized, you know what, I want to try and play some competitive, right? And from there, after a couple more months, then I realized, there, people are doing YouTube channels and whatnot, and we're still in peak COVID. So you know what? Let me give this a shot. Let me see if I can make and put out some videos there, right? So from then on out, the channel just kind of grew from there. And since Sword and Shield, basically we've been able to put a niche on our channel where we're really strong on team building. And that's really what our channel is known for. The nuances of construction and how to EV your Pokemon for VGC, what it takes in terms of typing and synergy and finding balance. That's usually what we've been able to do here. And since then, we've been able to grow since the Scarlet and Violet era, and we changed the approach to the channel a little bit. Now not only are we doing team building ideas and team building construction, but now we do meta analysis stuff where we're able to look at tournament results, we're able to break them down, and we're able to basically tell a story as far as like what's happening in the meta currently. We always put out meta analysis videos just like that. And so since then, the channel has lots of different content on there, from team building to just straight battles, to analyzing the meta, and now of course we have the draft league content up on there.
That's that's awesome. I can definitely relate. I was also getting my start in YouTube during that peak COVID era. I was like, you know what? This is fun. This is my hobby. I'll, put it on YouTube like everyone was doing. But it's awesome just like hearing about your story, not even like having any prior competitive Pokemon background really before getting super invested in it during that COVID era. What was your like more casual Pokemon experience prior to that? How many generations? Like when did you start?
Well, so I'm a 90s kid, so I've been playing since the Red and Blue days, and pretty much just played every single generation since, right? So after that, basically the only kind of competitive that we did, within that era was like Battle Tower, okay? And then since then, the real competitive stuff started in Sword and Shield. But before that, I didn't even know VGC existed. I didn't even know what that kind of era, the gimmicks and whatnot. I had no idea that any of that stuff was out there until peak COVID.
Yeah, that's awesome. And now I also wanted to, shout out your channel as just like one of the best resources for someone who may be a little bit newer to VGC because you get those team building guides and the meta analysis. It's like a one-stop shop to really learn so much about competitive VGC and the nuances of it. So,
Yeah,
um,
and since then, I think well, I didn't mean to cut you out there, but I think since then, we've been able to reach, I think, over 11,000 subs. I never thought I could get the channel to that much. Just throwing it out there. I thought this was just something to do to pass time. I didn't think it would get, at this point. So I guess people like what they see.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I was just gonna segue that into because like your channel has that team building focus. It sort of seems like draft is a natural fit for you and what you produce. I was gonna ask, starting now, getting into your more like draft specific questions, because this is your first draft league experience. What was your kind of thought process in when you were invited and then actually starting to draft your team?
So yeah, I think I was approached by Shuckle King, I think it was, or it was one other person, but they reached out to me and say, hey, PokeAim is hosting a draft league and he's doing a VGC focus this time around, and would you like to be a part of this? I was shocked, because we don't normally do draft league at all, like not at all, and not because we don't want to, it's because of time. Okay, during the day we have a full-time job. We teach, and then we're a basketball coach. We just, I'm competing for championships every year. We just finished our third straight run. We three-peated and made history in New York City. So there's really no time to play something on the side, like in addition to coming home and doing YouTube stuff. Now I have to play a draft league. I didn't think anybody would reach out for something like this. So I was a little shocked, but I said, you know what? The timing actually worked out, and that was the main difference there. He said that this would start like around late February or mid-February, and it worked out because my season is done at that point. Well, almost done because of the playoff run there. But since then, again, I haven't played draft league, never. Okay, but I have played a lot of fantasy basketball, and that involves drafting anyway. So I may be new to VG, Pokemon drafting, but I'm not new to draft league in general. So I guess just going by how I constructed our squad here. So we had the 18th pick, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's 20. Yeah, there's 20 players in total. So I had some notes here, just far as like a couple of combos that I wanted to try and pick up if they were available. I had some backup plans if they didn't work out. So originally, I wanted a strong support option, right? And the one that on my radar was actually Tornadus. Okay, and if it fell to me, great, I would take it. But unfortunately, I came up a little bit short. I think Keely took the Tornadoes, and I think she was about 15th in the draft order. So that was out the window. So I couldn't go with Tornadoes because, the reason I wanted Tornadoes because it just enables a lot of other options. With Tailwind support, you have weather control, you have Prankster, status moves and whatnot. So it was a pretty good idea to try and draft Tornadoes, at least for what I wanted to do. But Keely took it, so that was off the board, right? So I figured, okay, uh, I'm looking around. Fluttermane is gone. Chenpao Bolt is gone, or even Urshifu is gone. So a lot of the big offensive hitters were gone. But then I saw, okay, there's still Blood Moon here. So I figured, let me try and go with Blood Moon and Farigiraf with the number 2 pick, right? So I took Blood Moon Farigiraf. So in VGC, those two are a pretty good combination because you get the Trick Room set up, and then from there, you can deny priority moves, and then Blood Moon, with having a low speed, can do some sweeping under Trick Room. So I picked those two first, right? Um, and then from there, I was looking around. I was looking for the Indeedee, right? And I almost took it, but unfortunately it was taken off the board, and that plan went out the window. Like I before the photograph, I actually wanted the Indeedee, but Emil took it, and Emil was the guy before me, so that was really really unfortunate. Otherwise, I would have just went like Indeedee Hatterene or Indeedee something, okay, and then just go from there. But they took it, so I went with photograph. But I remembered, uh, I still wanted that strong support option because Blood Moon can play under Tailwind and it can also play under Trick Room, right? So I still needed a Tailwind setter, or I would have liked to have a Tailwind setter. So I looked on the board. Whimsicott was gone. Tornadus is gone. But what was still around was Murkrow for cheaper than those guys. Whimsicott 20 points. Tornadus saved almost the same thing, 19 points. Murkrow for 13, right? So the cool thing with Murkrow versus those other guys, Murkrow is slower, right? So if I wanted to change weather, if the time needed to, right, I would have control because I'm the slower weather setter. So I figured this is the next best prankster mon, right? So I took the Murkrow at number 3. So now I have the idea of playing Tailwind and I have the idea of playing Trick Room. And then from there, I needed another strong threat under Tailwind to try and at least take advantage and put on some pressure. So I looked on the board a little bit more, and I figured, hey man, let's just go with Hisuian Typhlosion. So now we have the sun aspect on the team. We can go Sunny Day. We can blow things up with Eruption, make teams respect that lead. And then at the same time, I can still go for the Trick Room idea with Photograph, and Blood Moon. So the first 4, and Hisuian Typhlosion at 7, I thought was a pretty decently valued pick. I had other ideas. I wanted to try Hisuian Arcanine. That was taken from Keeley again at number 4. All right, so
Yeah.
I lost 2 picks there. I had other ideas. Maybe the Porygon was another one I wanted to try and consider. P2 just as another Trick Room setter would be an option. Torkoal was already off the board, so that was unfortunate. And yeah, I just said, you know what, let me just go with the Typhlosion. I also considered, water spout stuff. I even looked at Blastoise towards the end of the draft. Like, do I want to draft Blastoise here and go Rain Dance water spout stuff? But that I ran into some issues with trying to pick the Blastoise. I'll look at that later. By the way, the guy next to me, Mr. Mount, before I even just continue, I don't know how you guys let Mount have all these mons, man. I was like, wait a second. You saw it, right? Like before
Yeah.
the draft even started, he had all his picks. He had 5 picks, and it was like an actual VGC team. It was Pelipper, Arkeladon, Mousesoul, Overgrowth. Like, wait a second. How is this guy able to have all these mons before any of us?
Yeah, I'm
And
like a
then he still
big
gets it.
yeah, I'm a big Rain fan, and Mount was able to just, plug in the entire Rain draft like that. I've never drafted even Rain this hard. I think, he did it in 20 coaches too, which is insane. Like the Archaludon Mousehold, and then from there, that core doesn't necessarily need Rain, but it's just kind of Rain has enough redundant pieces where it'll always work out unless 3 people want it. Because you have Pelipper and Politoed, you have a bunch of Swift Swimmers, and even something like Archaludon doesn't necessarily need to play in the rain, or the rain team doesn't necessarily need Archaludon to work. So there's plenty of resiliency with the rain drafting, but I think Mount worked out extra well because nobody else was on it.
Yeah, and then he just found value at Basculegion and Pelipper. I was like, what? You guys let him have this? Okay. All right. But anyway, I digress. So after that, I figured, okay, we have a couple special attackers. We have a couple support mons here. I still need some physical threats here. Okay. But before I went into the physical threats, I saw the Smeargle at number 7, at 17. Okay. Not 17 over, but 17 points there. And, one of the classic VGC Reg H Regulation G teams does involve Smeargle, Fergraph, Ursaluna, and the Calyrex Ice Rider. That's another kind of core in the past 2 regulations, right? So I figured if I don't take Smeargle, somebody else is gonna do it, and I don't want to play against them if they have a Smeargle. That thing is gonna run like 26 moves. So let me see if I can make it work. So I took the Smeargle, okay, in hopes of fake out, sport pressure, follow me, wide guard, whatever it is I needed it to do. I'm sure I could find some value out of it. So I took it. And then from there, I still needed some physical options. Great Tusk looked great, pun intended. It looks like it was a good combo with Murkrow. It did kind of that. When think older formats with like Talonflame or Regulation B stuff with Murkrow too. And I figured, with Sun, Typhlosion and Great Tusk looked okay. Okay. Um, then even before the Great Tusk, I still wanted a physical threat on their Trick Room. And I saw Glastrier at 10 points. I figured, look, this thing can sweep. It's 600 base stats. Okay, I don't have any mythicals, and I don't think I'm gonna be able to get one anyway. So let me get the let me pick up the Glastrier, and without revealing too much, it was the star of the show in our week 3. Okay, but now I have a general idea. Okay, I have a Trick Room mode, I have a Tailwind mode, I have a Weather mode. Okay. And after this, I realized I'm still trying to safely set up Trick Room, right? And classic partner in VGC, if you have a Trick Room setter, you need a support mod to be able to do that. Okay, usually a redirector. But the Indeedee is gone, okay, and the Amoonguss is gone. So the Ogerpons are gone at this point. We're late in the draft here. So I looked at Brute Bonnet, okay, and previously this thing was usually called Bad Amoonguss, with the typing and the slightly faster speed. But I figured this is best available at this time. It can still do the job of Amoonguss. I still have Spore Pressure. I still have Redirector on my team, and I still need something to be able to help this Paragraph here. So, and I can still play him under the sun, right? And it can still hit hard because it can get an Adamant boost. So I figured let's work with the Brute Bonnet and let's see what happens. And then the last pick, I have a couple points left. So, at this point, I'm just trying to find anything that I might even remotely try and use. I just picked up a Toxapex, and, at 3 points there. And I did bring it to week 3, but I didn't need it, but I had it just in case I needed it. Again, another slow mon that I could use in Trick Room. If I have to, I can use it for, stalling games if I need to, those toxic infestation recover, painful bunker ideas. I could play it a little bit differently if I have to, besides that. But at 3 points, I didn't really know what else I can pick up that I really needed. But that's pretty much it. So that's our squad.
One thing I like about that Toxapex team too, like I don't know if you end up playing James on the schedule, I don't remember,
I do.
but you do. It's like a great little counter team into Dondozo because it, can haze away the boost. Just coming like thinking about it, as more of a singles mon a lot of the time what it does is haze stuff, but it'll be fat enough to always, guaranteed remove Dondozo's boosts if you need it to.
Well, don't tell him that. I mean,
Yeah.
well, that's also why we picked up the
Yeah.
Murkrow too, because Murkrow also has
Yeah.
access to haze.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you'll have a
And
good, theoretically good Dondozo matchup.
yeah, but in reality, I also said this in my own like draft
Mhm.
analysis video. I actually don't really like our team. I think it's a little too linear. We'll say it like that. Just as far as like standard VGC sets are concerned. But at the very least, with the options that I had and the points I had available and where I was on the draft board, at the very least, I have a strategy. There is something I can do. But if you ask me, do I actually like my team? I don't. I like some mons here, but I just figured this is the best I can do, with best available at the time.
Yeah. I think you were able to, put together like as someone like when I started out first in VGC draft back in Gen 8, I gravitated towards that trick room as well. I later learned like it's not necessarily my favorite thing to run, but I think, if you want to pick it up, it gives you a super strong mode. Maybe yeah, it does play a little bit linearly, but I think the Murkrow alleviates a lot of that pressure for your team. And I think I kind of like saw a lot in your week 2 battle, especially just kind of being able to, highlight the multiple different modes on your team. And while that one didn't necessarily end up with the like, perfect result, had things maybe gone a little bit less unlucky game 1 and then game 2 you dominated, it could have just been over in 2 games. So
Yeah, I remember week 2. That was against Owen there. This I almost couldn't play him. Believe it or not, he couldn't play. I think we played on a Friday, right? And he couldn't play on the weekend either. And we couldn't play during the week at all because I was on vacation. Okay, and so the only available day that I could have played him was the same day I came back from my vacation. So when I came back from my flight, I had to play Pokemon, and to truth be told, I prepped zero. I did not prep at all. I didn't even have the team ready. So when I got home, I tried to make the team as fast as I could, and then I just jumped right in there. And
yeah.
I looking back, I remember game 1 towards the end. I think I generally threw that, and I didn't realize it until I rewatched it later on. Um, but in that game 1, even yes, he did get the crit that did matter, but I still had, and I did have a chance to win. And there was still 2 turns of Trick Room up on the board. It was my Typhlosion and my Blood Moon against his Skarmory, and it was the Thunderous, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know what was going on in my head at that moment. I even checked the screen for 2 turns of Trick Room. All I had to do was just press an Eruption and Hyper Voice 2 times, and even if he protected, the game was done. But I switched out the Typhlosion, and I don't know why I did that, because my Flosion is slower than his Thunderous. It would have just ended things immediately, but I did that, and I tossed game 1. Unfortunately, game 2 I recovered. And then game 3, I called my leads wrong. He went back to Dragonite Chenpao, and I led the Typhlosion. I should have just kept it in the back like I did the other game, and it cost me. But Owen did exactly what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So no fault there. And I even week 1, like I week 1, same thing. I think when I played Mount, same idea. I didn't prep at all. I was in the middle of coaching a semifinals game, and I just quickly made the team later that night, and I just jumped right in there, and I think he demolished me. That was already like a tough matchup anyway, but man, I really wish I had some time to prep these first 2 weeks. But week 3, a little bit different story. I actually had the time to sit down and look at things and and play a little bit differently, because what I realized with these first 2 weeks and the CTS, and I even said this in my week 3 video, these dudes are playing BGC, but they're not really playing BGC, man. These guys are, we're still playing doubles, but they're using some crazy sets and items that you just normally don't even see. Like I think in both weeks, Mountain, oh, excuse me, they had the Chilon Berry. I didn't even know what that thing was. I didn't even know that was an item in the game. I was like, what is this item? Oh, it produces. I guess it makes sense with my Fergraph and Blood Moon. Um, but I didn't even know that was an item. And there was some very interesting moves on some of these ones. But after looking at week 1, it was like, okay, if this is how these guys are gonna play it, then I got to change the way I got to play too. And I think moving forward, we're gonna have to keep adapting a little bit. We can't really play standard. We can keep something standard, but as far as like other things that I want to try and do, I think this best of one, not best of one, but the closed team sheet is just going to make quite a bit of a difference here.
Yeah. Um yeah, because you've been playing 2 singles players in the first weeks who are like super extensive draft league background, and Joey I know has been preaching especially this philosophy of just Pokemon is Pokemon, draft is draft. Like at the end of the day, whether it's 1 or 2 on the side, like it's still draft and the techs are still gonna hit. And I think, coming like from someone who necessarily like I got my background starting like playing competitive Pokemon with the draft stuff, just trying to learn when to foresee like the techs, and it like emphasizes the scouting aspect of things, and especially now that like VGC's gone like more open information, it's like it requires almost a different skill set, and it's like gotten further away from what regular VGC actually is.
Yeah, and I noticed that too. So like you that's why it was like, okay, this is interesting. This is a little bit different than what we normally like to do. But at the very least, it's a good challenge. It's something different. And we'll have to see how the rest of the weeks play out. We play some absolute chads in the closeout. We play Cybertron, we play James Beck, and I think we play Mr. Joey Pokey AMD himself in the final week. Was that a setup? I have no idea.
But you have like a stacked
Mhm.
schedule because like Owen and Mounte have been like incredible this generation on like the singles draft league side of things. They both, I believe, Mounte definitely won a championship, and Owen won a couple recently on the singles side. So those are two incredible coaches. And then this week, yeah, I remember you play Nexus, right? Because I was like doing the highlight Pokemon, like from my perspective of the match. I was thinking that your like best threats, I guess I can give you my insights from what I saw now that like you've actually played it, was on your side. I thought this was going to be like a Great Tusk kind of week where he's setting up the sun, and otherwise you pressure a lot of his bulk with like your dual stabs plus like a heavy slam or something for Clefable. And I thought that Great Tusk would be like your key to victory. And on Nexus's side, I thought he would try to prioritize the Trick Room with the Torkoal potentially as like his like main Trick Room sweeper, and his best like sort of way of enabling it was like Iron Hands Porygon too. And that's how I kind of saw the matchup working out, with just like Iron Hands not even necessarily clicking Fake Out because you do have that for Farigiraf, but just offensively threatening so much damage but probably needing to Terra. And I thought that you could potentially take advantage of that sort of dynamic with your team. But I'm curious to obviously I haven't watched your game yet, but if you have like any insight that you can share while you were like building the team without giving too much away.
Sure. Okay. So the key threat on his team, from our point of view, was the Iron Hands at number one. He We had only one way really to deal with that. Well, I shouldn't say one, but Hands was the main focus from when we looked at his team. Uh, I thought maybe he could bring Zard, but he didn't bring Zard. And I didn't even look at Clefable. I thought that thing probably doesn't come. Same with the Malamar, Bruxish, and Crabominable. I mean, those were like his end draft picks. I didn't think those were coming. I felt like he had to just rely on basically his first five there. And if he had brought Zard, okay, great. Um, and I for us, Great Tusk, yes, was a player, but actually he was not the MVP. And I guess I can load some insight without spoiling too much. This will be the title of week three video. We benched the number one draft pick. All right, who was our number one draft pick?
It was you benched the Blood Moon. That's wow. Because like
I
Nexus, I'm
I,
just looking at his team now.
I
He
benched
like
it.
doesn't have a normal resist, so that's a crazy crazy statement. But I see the vision, right? It's not fast enough, it's not slow enough, is kind of in this matchup. Normally that works great, but it's kind of trapped in limbo with Nexus. Your teams are trying to accomplish similar things in different ways. They're both sunroom. Like Nexus doesn't necessarily go as hard on Tailwind as you do, but you, I think, are more devoted like to some of the sun aspects without like having chlorophyll. So it's just like it's a weird matchup dynamic.
Both matches ended the same way, and like I said, the Great Tusk was a player, but he was not the MVP. He did not lead me in kills. I get, unless you don't want me to spoil it, I won't spoil it. But I can tell you what was the game plan for his Iron Hands, because that was ultimately what it came down to.
Oh yeah, no, I'm curious to hear this Iron Hands game plan because it does look pretty challenging on your side.
The MVP was the Glastrier.
Ooh, that's pretty spicy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was afraid of Glastrier just because I thought after you eruption or like in Trick Room, the eruption Torkoal looks pretty strong because your fire resists were looking kind of bleak without like giving too much like devoting it to Terra. It's just like Typhlosion and Doxapex. So I figure maybe if you Terra into something like a Terra Dragon, that could be pretty cool here on the Glass Tree. I'm not
you
gonna
guessed right.
Yeah. Oh, I.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, but the game plan overall, actually, for this was that, if it came down to the hands, which it did, there was only one Pokemon on my team that could help me do this, and it was the Glacier. It was a Terra Dragon set, just to be able to resist his little fire stuff, but to be able to at least win this end game for the Iron Hands, it was an Iron Defense Body Press Leftovers Protect set.
Ooh, that's yeah. Now I'm just really excited to see how this one actually plays out because that'll come out. This video is coming out Friday, so that video will come out Sunday.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that's a real
The
draft league set right there. That's not coming in standard VGC.
I figured I have to play this way. After first 2 weeks, okay, look, if they're gonna do this, then I have to make some changes there. And that was the main thing that I could come up with there. I could handle his Torkoal and his Walking Wake and whatnot. I have the tools for those guys. I just have to change the weather, which I did with the Murkrow. But the Iron Hands was the main thing I had to figure out there. You might say, you got two ground types. What do you mean? Well, that the thing is, the Iron Hands is a fighting type. It pressures the Blood Moon anyway, and he's slower than me, so the Trick Room won't work there. And the Great Tusk, more or less the same thing. It does struggle sometimes against the hands, especially if he was a Terra Grass. So I had one out here. It was the Glacier, and I just have to just set up and stall until he can't do damage anymore. And then I just win with the body press stuff, which also pressures his Porygon, by the way, if he did bring it, which he did.
Mm. That's a really really solid game plan. And I'm just like looking at Nexus's team. If he had maybe the unaware follow me Clefable could have been a
Yes.
little dicey, but you do I think have great options to pressure it before you need to rely on the Glacier in the end. So yeah, I think that was a super super good tech there.
Yeah. If he did bring the Zard, you know who was gonna come to the game? It was gonna be the Toxapex. But he
Ooh.
did not bring. Yeah, yeah. I had the so the Toxapex had chilling water also. Um, and in the rain, that was my idea to try and pick up the Zard here. And at the same time, it's another way to reduce the hand's damage for that. And then I could stall out that way with the recover painful bunker stuff. So if he did, I would have brought it, but it didn't come to the games. It came to with the six, but I didn't use it. And I think I put and then on this Toxapex, you'll see it in the, I guess in the preview. But I first 2 weeks, people brought berries against me. So you know what? I'm gonna bring a berry. I'm gonna put a electric berry on it. Yeah, what is that thing called?
The
Wakan berry.
Wakanberry, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? I'm putting that now. Let me do one on these guys here. So I put a Wakan berry on it just in case.
That's awesome. Just like getting to hear
Yeah.
your, thought process. Like you're kind of being absorbed into the draft league. Hopefully, just like speaking for myself as like a draft league player and also a viewer, hopefully draft league can hold on to you.
Yeah, yeah, we got some absolute chats in the second half of this league. So I'm excited to play those guys because it's not like I can DM Cybertron and say, hey, do you want to play best of three? The same thing with James Beck. You can't just message these guys and say, hey, you want to practice and run best of three? I'd be lucky if they even like read my DM there, right? So the fact that I'm able to have the chance and opportunity to play these legends, even if it is VGC draft, it's still like valuable and not too many will have the chance to do it. So I am excited for that second half there, regardless.
All right. Are there any shout outs that you want to make? I've kind of, we've gotten a little bit in depth on your draft background and like getting your week 1, 2, and now insight for your week 3 matchups. So are there any like shout outs that you want to make going like with this draft season, anything of the sort?
Yeah. So after the first couple of weeks, I had reached out to a couple people, just to help me at least prep moving forward because I realized, man, I can't just keep jumping into these games with no prep. These guys are just way too good, and they're gonna outplay me and out team build me. So I need some help from people who have played Draft League before and have had experience at least to get them into the front office of things. So, they go by Roman Cookie and Aki there. So shout outs to them for helping me out with the ideas. I created the EV spreads for a lot of our squads, but at least they helped me think of the ideas there, whereas I could create the spreads myself. So shout outs to those guys for helping me out thus far. It was a big reason why I was able to come out of week 3 with that dub. Um, yeah, especially the glad, benching the Blood Moon is no one man decision there. That's your number one pick. All right, I would imagine every single person in their draft league in most games should, maybe they do bring their number one pick, but uh, we had to make a decision and say, you know what, we're not bringing the Blood Moon this week, and to invoke the Glacier was a choice there. And again, that's why I drafted the Glacier. Listen, 600 base stats for a reason. I need his services, and if I can get value out of that mid round, that's what I was looking for there, and we did get it. So great job, Glacier.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that was some great shout outs. This is great to hear. Yeah, I think part of, why I enjoy Draft League so much is not only getting to face great players, but also just getting to work with great minds. There's so many people who are just down to help run like test sets, test mocks if they have the time. And yeah, any final words about just anything before we wrap it up?
That's pretty much it, man. So thanks again, Jesse, for having me. This is pretty cool to come on here and just talk a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for hopping on. Yeah, okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this week of draft notes and especially this interview portion at the end. Even if I would be totally happy if someone just skipped the draft notes phase as long as they got to watch this interview. So thank you all for watching. This has been Jay Bear alongside CloverBells, and yeah, peace.